The topic I would like to treat with you will be based on the Nigerian Federalism. The Nigerian Federalism. Of course, many students seem to be very confused about federalism and the Nigerian Federalism. They are two different topics, despite the fact that they are interwoven. Now, when we talk about Nigerian Federalism, we'll be talking about the foundation that gave birth to the preamble. That is the title Nigeria is using as Federal Republic of Nigeria. Now, the origin of the word federal is what we want to look at in this topic. The foundation that gave birth to the name Nigeria is what we are looking at. So, federalism as a topic, Nigeria federalism as a topic, there are two different aspects. Now, what is Nigeria federalism? And how do we define Nigeria federalism? Now, we shall be looking at it from this particular concept. The definition of Nigeria federalism. Now we look at the origin of Nigeria federalism. Then we look at possibly we look at the characteristics of Nigerian federalism. Then we look at what we can call the challenges of the Nigerian federalism. And then we now look at Nigeria federalism and regionalism, and then we look at Nigeria federalism and stateism, and then we look at the challenges confronting Nigeria federalism. So, of course, from this aspect of Nigeria and regionalism, Nigeria and statism, and as well as the challenges, then we'll be able to have a better understanding of when Nigeria was operating on the basis of a region, and of course when Nigeria was came into the structure of statism. Now, before we go deeply into that, what is Nigeria federalism? Now, right, student, Nigeria federalism can be defined as a political structure, that allows the division of governmental powers, from the center to other component units, or you call it regions. So, irrespective of the topic, the aspect of this definition says a structure that allows power to be divided from the center to other regions, or we use the word component unit. Why the word component? Because all the other particular governmental structures attached to the center does not command the kind of power the center commands. That is why, that is what gave birth to the idea of the word component. So all power is at the center, but based on the provision of the Constitution, the power is being divided, is being shared in a particular proportion, not in full proportion. And when you talk about full proportion, you may be talking about the type of confederal structure that any other country may be operating. And in a confederal structure, don't forget that there is always the creation of a weak center, and then the regional government or components are powerful. They are more powerful than the center. So, and in that respect, we use the word collegial executive. All right. Now, Nigerian federalism is a structure that allows power to be divided from the center to other regions. And then, what gave birth to this particular Nigeria federalism? how did Nigeria come about the word federalism? Of course, don't forget that the British gave Nigeria independence. In other words, the British colonized Nigeria. Just like Britain colonized Ghana, just like Britain colonized Gambia, just like Britain colonized Sierra Leone in West Africa, just like Britain colonized India, just like Britain colonized Pakistan, just like Britain colonized Egypt, and as well in the overseas territory, the British gave independence to Canada. And now, foundation for Nigerian federalism will not be mentioned without the British, because I will remind you of history here. The British took interest in Africa around 1847. Around 1847, there about the 18th century, they took interest in Africa, and of course, Nigeria was part of the nation the British took interest in, though not called Nigeria by then, a geographical entity in Africa, now West Africa. And now, I would like to analyze, based on the origin of Nigerian federalism, I would like to give you a list of how the foundation of federalism came to become a political structure in Nigeria, especially for the UTM student here. Now, what are the basis of having this word federalism in Nigeria? Now, let's look at it. First of all, I said the British had interest in Nigeria, and the interest became visible in 1847. And then we now look at one, in 1900, the British took the full administration of Nigeria, though it was not called Nigeria by then. And then, secondly, in 1906, there was the first amalgamation. There was the first amalgamation. Now, that amalgamation looks like a foundational concept to what we are looking at as federalism. Okay, the Northern Protectorate, and the Lagos colony came together as one administration. And then Roman figure 3, in 1914, there was a complete amalgamation of the Northern Protectorate and the Southern Protectorate, which includes Lagos colony. Now, the foundation for the amalgamation of Nigeria gave birth to the name Nigeria, because for the first time Nigeria was called Nigeria in 1914. But before 1914, we had what they call Northern Protectorate, Southern Protectorate, and Lagos colony. But when the amalgamation came, it was now named Nigeria. Of course, this name cannot be mentioned without Flora Shaw, the girlfriend of Lord Lugard, who came on expedition to the Niger area coast. And for the first time, she was the one that pronounced the name, this is Niger area. And what year was that? She pronounced that in 1897. And then, as a British journalist, this particular Niger area Flora Shaw mentioned was documented. So until 1914, when the Niger area, that word was synchronized into what we now call Nigeria in 1914. Now look at it foundationally, the way the British arranged Nigeria. 1900, they took official administration of Nigeria. 1906, there was the first amalgamation. 1914, there was a complete amalgamation of Nigeria. And then we now look at the fourth process. We look at the fourth process of how Nigeria federalism was born. The fourth process. What is that fourth process? Okay, now number 4. In 1922, now the period of written constitution came to surface. In 1922, don't forget that before 1922, I will also remind you of history, there were no written constitution. The colonial masters did not give us a written document. As a matter of fact, the Northern Protectorate was ruled by proclamation. The Southern Protectorate was ruled by certification. So there was no proper document until 1922, when the first written and rigid colonial constitution was introduced. So this constitution was the first constitution to introduce what we call limited franchise. And then with the limited franchise, it now means that the northern part of Nigeria was isolated from voting, while the southern part of Nigeria, some of the areas were allowed to vote based on the provision of the Clifford's Constitution of 1922. Now, this is the defect. Because the North was isolated from participating in this limited franchise, that laid a foundation to what we now call this particular political structure, federalism. Now, North was not allowed, South was allowed. So that showed a sort of division. That showed a sort of segregation. That showed a sort of negligence. And the negligence now began to give birth to other things. And one of the excuses that Mr. Clifford gave was that most of the northern people in Nigeria did not actually embrace formal education. Some of them believed in going to the Islamic school. Some of them felt religious sentiment or belief is the only thing that will make you as a person, based on what their religious fathers and founders have taught them. So formal education to them was just anti-religious to them. So, and one of the reasons he decided to remove the northern part from that active participation and then included the southern part, and then the residents of Lagos in this provision were allowed to vote. And then not only allowed to vote, it is those who are in the working class that are allowed to vote, and it is those that earn 20 pounds per annum are allowed to vote. All right. And then apart from this constitution again that laid the foundation for federalism, the fifth one was the 1946 Richard's Constitution, a foundation for Nigerian federalism. Now, when Mr. Richard came, Mr. Richard was supposed to be in charge for 9 years, but unfortunately, he only ruled for 2 years. And one of the reasons was because when he was making the provision of this constitution, he did not consult Nigerians. Of course, as a JAMB student, that is one of the aspects of the question you should expect. Nigerians were not consulted in the drafting of the 1946 Richard's Constitution. And they were isolated. So, and then Mr. Richard, one of the things that made his own constitution to be unique and that laid the foundation for federalism was that he introduced regionalism, a short form of what we call regional government. He introduced regionalism. A short form of what we call regional government. And then in this particular aspect, some of the political structures the Richard's Constitution provided for also gave us an insight into the foundation of federalism. So if regionalism can come in, and then we are talking about Nigerian federalism, that means this particular constitution played a significant role in the foundation, because now we are talking about each of the geographical entity having a form of autonomy. So according to Richard's Constitution, the northern part of Nigeria, the eastern part of Nigeria, the western part of Nigeria became visible. And then apart from this particular Richard's Constitution that introduced regionalism, we will not forget the sixth particular factor that brought about the birth of Nigerian federalism, and then we now look at the 1951 Macpherson Constitution. And this was the constitution for the first time in the history of Nigeria that introduced ministerial titles. When you hear minister of this, minister of that, minister for that, minister for this. Of course, the 1951 Macpherson Constitution gave birth to this particular title. And then not only the title, it gave birth to the portfolio. The portfolio. The portfolio. So, for knowing somebody who is a government official, having certain autonomy to operate, Richard's Constitution gave birth to that. And this particular office connects to the foundation for Nigeria Federalism. And then we'll now look at the final aspect, which is the 1954 Littleton Constitution. Now, the Littleton Constitution is the one that gave the full interpretation of what we call Nigeria Federalism. The Littleton Constitution was the only constitution that introduced the division of governmental powers from the federal government, commonly called the central government, to the state government and the local government. In the Constitution, it was from the Littleton Constitution that we know the function of the federal government, the function allotted to the state government, and the functions that should be allotted to the local government. So the Littleton Constitution gave us a full-fledged interpretation of Nigeria Federalism. And then from there we look at other factors that could be responsible for the foundation of Nigeria Federalism. Now, how do we know that Nigeria is practicing federalism? How do we actually know what we even mean with this little analysis of Nigeria? How do we actually know what we mean by the Nigeria Federalism? And then we're looking at characteristics. Characteristics of Nigeria Federalism. Characteristics. That is the nature of Nigeria Federalism. Number one, we look at the aspect of ethnic diversity. Ethnic what? Diversity. Ethnic diversity. Nigeria is known to be a multi-ethnic society. As a matter of fact, based on one or two research, we speak more than 300 languages in Nigeria. And then, of course, we are all familiar with the three main tribes: the Hausa, the Yoruba, and the Igbo. Why do we have to specialize on these three people? Because their language seems to be more popular than any other language in Nigeria. But of course, that is not enough, because in a multi-ethnic society like Nigeria, the only structure that can prove it is the federalism, because the federalism is a wider structure that can give accommodation. Of course, let me even break it again, that federalism is like a duplex. Unitarism is like a self-contained or a room and parlour self-contained. So when you talk about a duplex can contain both the nuclear family and the compound family. So everybody can be in their various apartments without any issue. But you cannot use that system for a room self-contained or a room and parlour self-contained, because of course it will lead to crisis. So then I hope I'm communicating. Now, one of the character of federalism is what? Ethnic diversity. Yes, that is how to know a federal state. Ethnic diversity. Different languages, different culture, different customs, different tradition. The USA is also an example of this ethnic diversity. the whole world, like people will say, the whole world is America. The whole world is America. In as much as you have been naturalized, every nation of the world is America. And every nation of the world means diverse culture, diverse customs, and diverse tradition. And another aspect again of knowing what we mean by the Nigerian Federalism is the system of government in operation. The system of government in operation. And then how do we know that a country is operating federalism? Of course, it's very simple. The most commonly adopted system is what? Is the presidential system of government. That's the most commonly adopted system in a federal structure. Is the most commonly adopted system in a federal structure. Of course, I'm not disposing the fact that some nations adopt the presidential system into whatever structure they are operating and then bear the title president. Of course, most of them may not be democratic, but they bear the title president. Cameroon is an example of a country with the title president, and then the president of Cameroon has been there since 1981 at the age of 91. So system of government, the system of government adopted, that will tell us about the type of structure that we call federal structure that we have adopted. Then we look at component units. The component unit also determines, like in Nigeria we call it local government, LG. We call it local government. So of course, having the presence of local government in Nigeria is also a sign that Nigeria has adopted federalism. Now, the local government is a grassroots government. Of course, in Nigeria, not everybody will have access to the president, and not everybody will have access to the state governor. But you should be able to have access to the representative of government at the local level. And why are they there? They are there for the continuity of the job that is supposed to be done from the center to the state and then to the grassroots level. So they are representative of grassroots government. They are there to promote growth and development at the grassroots level. All right, I hope I'm communicating class. Then the fourth one to know that Nigeria is actually operating a federal structure is the resource control. All right, and now when you talk about the resource control in Nigeria, the federal government is the only one with the exclusive right to the major resources of the country. The federal government of Nigeria has the only exclusive right to the major control of resources in the state. And that is why when you talk about control, like I've said, the army is being controlled by the federal government, even though they are dispatched to the state. The police is being controlled by the federal government, despite the fact that they are being dispatched to the state. Mint and printing, foreign policy, and many more. So the aspect of resource control shows that Nigeria is operating a federal structure because it is the federal government that is in charge of most of the resources that we talk about. Even the crude oil is being controlled by the federal government. That is oil exploration. Now, another aspect of Nigerian federalism that we also need to look at is the challenges of having or operating federalism. Of course, it is the only best structure for Nigeria as a multi-ethnic society is the federal structure. And like I've said from the beginning of this lecture class, that the idea of adopting federalism started from the foundation of colonialism, when the British begin to create Nigeria. They began to create Nigeria from 1900, when they took over the full administration of Nigeria, and then from that aspect, They continued till 1906 when there was a first joining together of some part of Nigeria for administrative conveniency. Then they continued again till 1914 when they now decided to join every part of Nigeria together, and that was commonly called the amalgamation of 1914. And of course, to remind you, I said the name Nigeria was born in 1914, but before the name was born, Nigeria was known to be a British protectorate called the Northern Protectorate, the Southern Protectorate, and the Lagos Colony. And then from 1914, we now began to have the aspect of introduction of a written and rigid colonial constitution. Mr. Clifford first introduced his own constitution, and then in his constitution, there were aspects that laid the foundation for Nigerian federalism, because the northern part of Nigeria was polarized. They were excluded from limited franchise that he introduced. So which means there is a foundation for separation. There was a foundation for separation in the provision of the 1922 Constitution. So those who have the right to vote are only those who are in Lagos and Calabar, the southern part of Nigeria, as I mentioned. And then not only that, they have to be in the working class, and they must have certain property to verify that they are qualified to vote. The 1939, Bernard Bodilon also came to the scene, and then he was the one that gave us the foundation for regional government. Yes, 1939, Bernard Bodilon. Of course, it was Bernard Bodilon that divided the southern part of Nigeria into what? East and West in 1939 for administrative convenience. Bernard Bodilon. Of course, I did not mention that earlier on. I beg your pardon for that, class. And then we now look at 1946. Richard now laid in the foundation of his constitution on Bernard Bodilon's foundation, and then brought in what we call regional government. Now, the idea of regional government is an indication that, wow, this country has really given birth to what we call federalism. And then we now go into subsequent constitution of 1951, Macpherson, who introduced ministerial titles and portfolios, and then we now come to the aspect of Littleton, who gave a full interpretation of Nigeria federalism. See you in the next class.